Hello again, friends, and it's that time when we get to chat with Maestro Mark Russell Smith, the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, and I know these are always busy days leading up to a Masterworks concert, so let me start by saying thank you for taking the time to visit with us.
The pleasure.
And this is a very special one because, again, we have a very special guest artist joining us, but for this Masterworks, we're going to shine a spotlight on a favorite of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra audiences, Sergei Rachmaninoff, and this time the Second Piano Concerto with an amazing soloist. So I don't mean to get out of order, but let's dip our toes there before we go back and take the program as a whole, because I assume this is kind of what started the creation of the program.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at a full season, we have our big symphonic statements, but I think it's super important to have, and audiences love it, big concerto statements as well. I mean, we have Emmanuel Ax, of course, at the end of our season, making two incredible concerto statements. But Michelle Cann, with whom I have not worked yet, this will be my first time. But I've heard so many great things about her, and I've heard her, and of course, there's the Curtis connection there, which we won't, which goes unmentioned. Not.
We dare not.
So the idea, of course, I mean, we'll talk about the Great American Symphony on the first half, and then juxtaposing the Great American Symphony with one of the great, I'm overusing that word, one of the most popular and most demanding concertos of the 20th century, the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto, I think works really nicely.
Well, when we're thinking about that as maybe the North Star around which we navigate the rest of the program, it is a fascinating program. And I do think we'll claim Rachmaninoff as an American, considering he ended his days in Beverly Hills, but it's quite an American program. And so who else to start with than Aaron Copland and some music from Rodeo.
So it's here's how it's designed. I mean, and here was my thought process, and this goes way back. Actually, this idea was brewing in my head like pre-COVID, and it was supposed to kind of happen during COVID year. Anyway. So the idea of the Great American Symphony. What is the Great American Symphony? I mean, we had Shostakovich 5 in Masterworks 1, arguably the great Soviet symphony. Is Beethoven 9 the great? I mean, there's like 3 or 4 you can choose from. What's the great romantic symphony? Mahler 2, whatever. I mean, what is the Great American Symphony? The symphony is a particular form. It has particular structure, and of course, every composer, the composers who wrote something called a symphony, had various reactions to that. And Sibelius made things shorter, made them all through composed. Barber wrote a very short symphony called Symphony. What the symphony is meant something different to different people as we get closer to our time. And so the symphony is a structure. The symphony has certain expectations. And so what I wanted to do, because I don't think there is a great American. I mean, there are great symphonies, don't get me wrong, but I don't think there's one piece that captures an era or captures Americana or captures everything about us and about our art, our American art, our uniquely American art, and our voice. Copland Third Symphony, maybe, Anyway, so this is how this thinking got going. What is the Great American Symphony? And so I decided to make my own, to take the symphony as being something in 4 movements. And you have an opening movement, you have a scherzo movement, a quick dance movement, you have a lyrical singing third movement, and then you have like a butt kicking, lively last movement, right? That's kind of the classical symphony, right? And so I chose 4 different composers who wrote pieces that roughly fit into those, those categorizations. And so, okay, for an opening of a symphony, you want something that starts boom, right? And isn't necessarily, and is a little bit extended, maybe comes back, ends nice and big, and has just great energy, but isn't like super fast necessarily, isn't like the last movement, So I decided on Copland. Copland, one of the great voices in America, of course. And so to use Buckaroo Holiday, use his music from Rodeo, ballet music, I mean, obviously was never intended to be symphonic. There's no such, I mean, Copland did write symphonies. He wrote, early on, he wrote a short symphony. He wrote the huge Symphony No. 3. But I decided that the opening of what I'm calling the Great American Symphony is Buckaroo Holiday, because it has folk tunes, it has cowboy tunes, it has that American energy, it has that Copland signature sound. It is so American. So that's our opening movement. Next, we have Judith Shatin's piece called Piping the Earth. This is a piece that Judith Shatin is a composer, a contemporary composer who teaches at UVA, University of Virginia, in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. And I got to know her music as music director of the Richmond Symphony. As a matter of fact, I did this very piece, Piping the Earth. And so it's exactly what it describes. It's kind of like not unlike the Rite of Spring with the earth kind of bubbling up. It's that same idea, but with very modern language, using all the colors of the modern orchestra. We have kind of bubbling things. We have lots of percussion. We have orchestral effects that just kind of burst forth. It's really, so this is the scherzo. This is the dance movement, or the kind of lively scherzo movement of our symphony. And the fact that she's a living composer helps. The fact that she's a she talks. I mean, we're talking about all the different elements of Americanness in being an artist. And so having a living composer was important in my American symphony. So Piping the Earth comes to us from the University of Virginia and Judith Shatin as our scherzo. Now we need a lyrical third movement. And frankly, Amy Beach's symphony was one of the reasons why I started this idea of the Great American Symphony, because she created a wonderful symphony. This Gaelic symphony was, I mean, she was the first woman to have a piece played by the Chicago Symphony. She is an amazing American story, Amy Beach. And she was so far ahead of her time. She became a great mentor to young female composers. It was all in the era of women's suffrage, and she had to play the game in order to survive as well as she could, and so became Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. She didn't even have her own first name for a lot of the music that she published, because she had to be somebody's wife. And anyway, it's like, I didn't really know the story. I knew the music, but I didn't really know her story. And she is like such a great American story of independent female striking out on her own and finding her way artistically, and studying with all the best people, and going over to Europe. I mean, doing all the things that American artists had to do then, but female artists didn't get to do. So she's a real powerhouse, a very interesting story. And this movement that she wrote is complex and lyrical and beautiful and sassy, and it just has all sorts of elements that speak to the American voice and to her unique voice. She's done tons of chamber music. She's done all sorts of things. But anyway, so she's somebody that we should get to know. And I don't believe that QCSO has played music of Amy Beach. I know that in our Up Close series we have, but I don't think, and I will have to look at the program notes to make sure, that I don't believe that the QCSO has played any Amy Beach in a concert. And so our third movement of our Great American Symphony comes from Amy Beach. And now, how do you end? You need, I mean, this is what every composer had trouble with, every composer except Beethoven. Every composer not named Beethoven and Mozart had trouble ending. Like, Bruckner, how to end, Tchaikovsky, how to end. I mean, always, you could have three great movements and then not have a great ending because you just couldn't sum stuff up, or anyway. So there is a piece called by John Adams that was commissioned, I believe, by the Pittsburgh Symphony. They commissioned 2 fanfares. One of them is called Short Ride in a Fast Machine. And it's, you know, you name your fast machine. Is it a Ferrari? Is it a rocket ship? Is it, you name it. But it uses minimalism, which is a unique style. And I mean, there is, and it is about rhythm. It is about rhythmic drive, not unlike the last movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. You know, how did Beethoven end his Seventh Symphony? It's about rhythm. It's a little bit about the tune, but it's about rhythm. And so this piece, The Short Ride in the Fast Machine, just has like, it has the most rhythmic drive of any piece I know. I remember listening to it while driving once and got so involved. And then I looked down and I was going like way too fast, way too fast. It was like, yeah, man. So it's just a killer piece. It just is a fantastic way to end the Great American Symphony. It's about 5 minutes and people just, I mean, anyway, it's John Adams, who's of course, one of the great important American composers still alive. And so our Great American Symphony represents all sorts of people, all sorts of genders, all sorts of eras. And so I really love this. And of course, we're going to play it 4 in a row. We're going to play it like a symphony. We're not going to have applause in between. Right. So it's going to be, I mean, this is a symphony. This is like a symphony on the first half, a concerto on the second half. And so that's how the program's designed.
We'll have to remember that when the folks who might be watching tonight actually come, or at any time, come and see us on the stage, to remember to tell people about that.
Right. Well, I'll remind you.
But it's a wonderful concept, and kudos to you. I think that's a great way to create our own American Symphony until one comes along. And yeah, I mean, because I think you summed it up very, very well. If you think about a certain time in human history and geography, the Shostakovich 5 that we heard last month, you know, kind of nails it, sort of sums it up in a lot of different ways. You mentioned Beethoven. I think Mahler lays a claim for capturing the essence of the end of the old world, right? The fin de siècle. But we don't have that yet for America. It's coming.
Well, I mean, that's arguable. I mean, there are people who say Copland's third. Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, American composers have written symphonies, don't get me wrong.
Oh, no, that's not it.
Right. I'm not trying to diss those composers.
But it's about the popular imagination, right? That's, I think, what you were getting at by making those comparisons to the other
right.
things.
And a symphony, I mean, in the 21st century, like a symphony is less of a thing. I mean, opera is now a big thing. I mean, composers really want to write operas because we're such a visual society now. But like symphonies became less important because of ballets, because of essays for orchestra, because like the form symphony wasn't the be all and end all of orchestral writing. And so composers did all sorts of different things and focused less on creating something called a symphony. And so, I mean, that was just a natural thing that happened, you know? And so it's kind of not surprising that we don't have, like you said, a symphony that sums up America, or that sums up America at the end of the 20th century.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's not at all surprising because people just aren't writing symphonies. And frankly, we're not commissioning symphonies. You know, we're not commissioning people to write symphonies. We're commissioning them to write concertos, to opera. You know, the focus is away from the form of symphony. And so anyway, so I think it's to create something, you know, of that form from all these disparate elements, I think, you know, does kind of sum things up a bit. And yeah, it was fun to kind of put together.
Well, and I think that by the time we get to intermission, we'll have thought, what a great program we've been to. Right. And yet,
wait,
here comes the main course. Sergei Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with an amazing soloist, Michelle Cann. And, you know, it would be too much of a stretch to say this has that connection to America that the composer later did. But what's captivating is this comes from a place that was already gone by the time we heard the Shostakovich, that work, right, in the October concerts. This was written by a young Russian who was, by all accounts, happily Russian at the time, though he did come to America and triumphantly perform the work here. But what is it about this work that made it to be for you the right piece for this November program?
Well, I mean, obviously Rachmaninoff is incredibly popular. He's popular because of the tunes that he writes. I mean, these tunes were later used in Kismet, and these tunes were stolen, and so people they can whistle these tunes whether they know it or not, and so we have the great tunefulness, and we have like just breathtaking virtuosity required. And so I think the last concerto we did was Rachmaninoff concerto, was the third piano concerto with Wei Luo, who just knocked it out of the park. Interestingly, and Andre Watts, who was a dear friend of mine, just passed away in the summer. And I believe the last time we've done the second piano concerto, Rachmaninoff, was with Andre Watts. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I'm correct about this. It was during our 100th anniversary year where Garrick Olson was supposed to play the third concerto, but then he canceled 2 weeks because he had a heart issue. And Andre Watts, my dear friend, Andre Watts, came and subbed, quote unquote, to have Andre Watts come in as a substitute is like, what does that tell you? But anyway, he changed the concerto from the third to the second. And that's because that's a piece that resonated with him more. That's a piece I did it with Andre Watts a number of times. I did it in Richmond, I believe. I did it anyway. So I've done that piece with him a lot. So that piece has special resonance with me and with Andre Watts, one of the, for someone I was privileged to work with. And now Michelle Cann, a new artist to me, and someone who has just prodigious talent, will bring her perspective to it, And so it's a piece that people love because of the tunes, because of the virtuosity, because of the familiarity with it. And so juxtaposing our American thing, where there's a lot of unfamiliarity with something that people know, that's also plays a role in how this piece is how the program is put together.
From your perspective as a conductor, so this I find captivating. This is a work that you have some great personal memories with and experience with, that you've worked with, and obviously also somewhat of a sentimental one because of your relationship with Andre Watts. When you are taking a piece with which you are, I should say, a concerto with which you are familiar, and then you're working with a soloist with whom you're not familiar, what challenges are there? I mean, obviously you take your cues from the soloist, but it is a conversation. So how do you,
Well, you take your cues from the soloist. And I mean, we've hired the soloist because for the whole package. I mean, I would never hire a soloist whom I disagree with, or with whom I have fundamental musical disagreements or stylistic or whatever. I mean, that just wouldn't happen. I'll be curious. Of course, she's going to do things differently than Andre Watts did, differently than Garrick Olson, and of course, and that's to be expected, and that's great. And so for me, it's less about saying, no, this is the way I do it. This is how we're going to do it. It's absolutely not that way. It's me being flexible, me listening to her. And I mean, if there's something crazy, or if there's something that or if I have an idea that I think works, then we talk. So it is give and take. But my job first and foremost is to support the soloist. And especially in a piece like this, the soloist, the soloist's ideas formulate tempo. I mean, answer most of the fundamental interpretive questions, because it's so obviously piano-centric. They're not long stretches for just the orchestra. If there were, then, and whatever, pianists don't touch that, unless it messes up what's coming up after the orchestral thing. I mean, of course, there are paragraphs for the orchestra alone, but not a lot. And so it's like professional challenge in a way, like especially the first rehearsal to keep things together, even if it's not what you expect. But we're all professionals, and we all know these pieces like backwards and forwards. And so I could do it, I could do it one way a month from now, and well, whatever. I mean, the piece has such power and validity and meaning that you can do it 50 different ways and still all those are still valid.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you something. We're just a third of the way through the Masterworks season, and you have already introduced us to some very important composers and artists with whom we're not as familiar as we should be. And of course, giving us some great stuff that we're familiar with. I just have to ask, is that, I would like to think that that is a bold statement about the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, the musicians who are here, the organization that's here, that we have the ability to do that, to make that mix of tackling things that others might shy away from in terms of really heavy works, but also to be bold in sharing new things. I'm just wondering if you're hanging out with your conductor buddies, and I don't even want to know what that locker room looks like, but is there some, do you ever get a chance to reflect on what it takes to have an organization that can do these great things that you're bringing to us?
Well, look, I reflect on it all the time. First of all, there are no conductor buddies. I mean, conductors, like you don't have friends who are other conductors. You certainly don't. No, I'm just kidding. Although there's a grain of truth in that, sorry to say. Because you're there's one conductor per, there's one music director. And so I'm not trying to get, and there's no sympathy asked for here, but absolutely I reflect on that fact. I mean, this is how, first of all, I think this is obviously, we make our statement with repertoire, how we feel like an American orchestra should present repertoire. And this is what we need to be doing. We need to create this mix of old and new. We need to introduce new voices. We need to do the old voices incredibly well. And we need to never give up those old voices. But we have to mix. We have to have that mix. So our musicians are great and welcome this as well. They love the fact that I and all of us take it as seriously. We take doing Judith Shatin piping the earth as seriously as we do Shostakovich 5, as we do Beethoven 9, as we do Brahms 4. We take that, we expect of each other and of ourselves the same commitment to new unfamiliar pieces and unfamiliar composers as we do old ones. And that's the culture here. That's the culture that I espouse as well. I mean, I don't study any less hard. I probably study more, So, and that the audience now, I believe, trusts us and they embrace us and they know that they are going to have not just an entertaining evening, but an evening that might make them think. And like you said earlier, there may be, like once every 10 years, there may be one piece they don't like, or maybe once every 20 years, or maybe with a past conductor, there were pieces. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, there may be pieces that they don't like, but they're always well played and they're well considered and they're well programmed. And so there's appreciation there. And I believe that our audience believes they're in for an enriching time. It's not about cheap entertainment, although they're going to love it, but it's also about being enriched and sometimes being challenged. And it's about having that mix of an experience when you come to the Adler or when you come to Centennial Hall. And that's what our patrons expect. And that's what they like, I think. And so that's what I believe that we need to be doing. And that's, here it is made manifest, in Masterworks 1 and 2. Well, I'm so grateful for the time you've been able to share with us. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. I do want to say a special thanks to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for support of this wonderful series. But most of all, Maestro, really thank you, because this, I know I speak on behalf of many, when it gives such texture and depth for our enjoyment of the music. So on behalf of all of those, I'd like to say thanks to the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Maestro Mark Russell Smith. My pleasure. Thanks.